They thought humanity was extinct, primitive, forgotten. But when a single human warship tore a Drexer mothership in half, the galaxy remembered, now the most feared species in the stars isn't the invaders. It's us, hidden for decades, forged in silence. Humanity is back, and we didn't come to talk. We came to finish what they started. And this time, we're not alone. The Drexor didn't conquer planets. They erased them. Every transmission that warned of their approach ended with the same 3 words. Run, they're here. Entire civilizations disappeared overnight. No diplomacy, no mercy, just fire from the skies and blackened ruins left behind. And for the longest time, the galaxy did nothing. The Council of 11, made up of the most advanced alien species in the quadrant, chose survival over resistance. Evacuate and retreat, they said. Preserve the knowledge. Wait for the storm to pass. But the storm never passed. It just grew. The Drexer were brutal insectoid monsters with advanced tech and no interest in anything but dominance. They'd swept across 3 sectors in 4 galactic years, and no one, not even the warrior-class Breck, had slowed them down. That's when the whispers started about a warship from a forgotten race. A ship built for one thing: to destroy. The humans had been gone for decades. Officially, they were non-compliant primitives with a disturbing love for chaos. Unofficially, they were feared. Rumor said they'd been kicked out of the Galactic Accord for their refusal to disarm. They called it security. The Council called it madness. Humans didn't just fight, they enjoyed it. And so humanity faded from galactic memory until the Battle of Kiril 4. Kiril 4 was a mid-tier trade planet. Nothing special, but it was strategic. And when the Drexer descended, the Council didn't even bother sending help. It was already written off, but that night the sky changed. Council surveillance drones caught it all. The Drexer mothership, as big as a small moon, hovered above the planet, its cannons glowing with pre-fire energy. Below, civilians screamed, trying to reach underground bunkers. Then the scanners glitched, just for a second, then again. And suddenly a reading classified vessel detected no origin, no Council ID. Nothing until it decloaked. It was long, black and quiet, its silhouette cut through space like a blade. No flashy colors, there are no translation pings, just one name etched in scarred steel across the hull. HSS Vengeance. The Drexer ship paused, probably confused. Then it charged weapons. The human warship didn't wait. It fired. A single shot, but not from any Council weaponry. This was different, dense, burning with a sound that rattled bones even through a vacuum. The kind of firepower you didn't regulate, the kind you buried deep in forgotten military laws. The Drexor ship flinched. Its shields cracked like glass, and then to everyone's disbelief it retreated. For the first time in recorded galactic history, the Drexer ran. The footage went viral, the whispers turned into urgent pleas. Find the humans. We need them. If they have ships like that, but humans don't answer calls, at least not politely, the HSS Vengeance didn't send a message. No contact. No communications. It simply vanished. Back into the black. The Drexer regrouped. They hit twice as hard at Garon Prime, trying to bury the embarrassment. Another planet gone, but there was something different now. Fear. The galaxy had never seen the Drexel fear anything, but they feared that ship. And what the Council didn't know, what no one knew, was that the Vengeance wasn't alone. It was the first the humans were watching. They had been watching, and now they were coming back. The Drexer weren't used to losing, especially not to a ship from a species they'd assumed was extinct or too primitive to matter. But after Kiril IV, something in their hive shifted. Their strategists, those grotesque telepathic brains suspended in nutrient tanks, stopped underestimating humanity. They started planning for them. For the Drexel, fear wasn't an emotion, it was an alarm in the hive mind, a signal that screamed unpredictable threat. And unpredictability was something the Drexer couldn't control. That made it dangerous. The Overmind perched in orbit above the shattered remains of Gorin Prime, summoned every surviving scout drone and warbeast to Sector 12 where Kiril IV had been. The orders were simple: track the human warship, analyze, capture, dissect. They even brought the Reavers genetically engineered. Drexer assassins bred for only one thing: hunting rare threats. But the humans had already moved on. Out in the dead zone beyond Council-regulated space, the HSS Vengeance drifted in the shadow of a broken moon. Inside it was nothing like the Council ships with their smooth curves and ambient lighting. The Vengeance was steel wires, old battle scars, and dimly flickering lights. The air carried the faint scent of burnt circuits and blood, and at its heart sat Commander Lin, Commander Arlen. She wasn't a diplomat, she wasn't a politician. She was battle-hardened, forged in Earth's final generation of soldiers before they'd gone dark. Her eyes were tired. Her voice rasped from years of recycled air and too many bad memories. But her hands, steady as death, she watched the recordings from Kiril IV again. Not out of pride, but calculation, the shot that pierced the Drexer mothership's shield had been from their prototype rail core. They only had 2 rounds left. "Any word from Earth?" she asked. Her tactical officer Kota looked up from the console. Still radio silence, HQ's not acknowledging Council transmissions, no change. Commander Arlen snorted. Of course not, typical. That was the thing about humanity. When the Council kicked them out decades ago, humans didn't beg to stay. They vanished, shut down all beacons, and left no trace. They had made a pact. If the galaxy didn't want them, then the galaxy could survive without them, but the galaxy hadn't survived. The Council's peace treaties were worth less than the stars they floated near. Every species had disarmed, grown soft, and traded their weapons for philosophy. Humanity didn't, not completely. Commander Arlen stood and walked toward the command deck window. Outside, the stars shimmered cold and distant. Somewhere out there, Earth still spun, still watched. But she didn't even know exactly where, and she wasn't heading back. "Not yet," Commander Kota said, suddenly urgency in his voice. "We've got a ping, multiple ships dropping from Warp Drexer signature." Commander Arlen's jaw clenched. "How many? 14? No mothership but 1 Reaver-class heavy recon, dot." She smirked. "They're sending dogs to sniff us out orders. Let them sniff." The Vengeance didn't cloak this time. It stayed visible like bait in open space. The Drexer warships approached, weapons charged. One of them pulsed a warning signal in standard code. "Stand down. Prepare for capture." Commander Arlen leaned over the comms. Kota played the message. He blinked. "What message? The one I recorded after Kiril IV." He nodded and tapped a few keys. A distorted human voice crackled across the battlefield. Angry, tired, and clear. "To the Drexor, Overmind. You wanted to conquer. You should have checked under the bed before waking the monster. Do you want war? You just found it." And then she cut comms. "Fire," Commander Arlen said. The Vengeance lit up. Railcore. Round number 2 screamed through the black and smashed straight through the Drexer Reaver ship, splitting it in half like a melon under a hammer. The shockwave tore 2 others apart, the remaining ships scattered, but Commander Arlen wasn't chasing. She didn't have the ammo for that. She wanted them to run, let them report back. Let the Overmind know humans weren't just back, they were hunting. The Drexer didn't retreat often, it wasn't part of their nature. But when the fractured remains of their recon fleet limped back to the Overmind, something inside the hive shifted again, this time more urgently, more chaotically. The humans were real, they were dangerous, and worse, they were unpredictable. The Overmind issued an emergency override across its fleet clusters. It paused the next wave of planetary assaults and instead focused its full computational force on one question: Where had the humans gone all these years? That answer wasn't in any council archives. It wasn't on any trade route, logs, or alliance charts. Humanity hadn't just disappeared. They'd buried themselves under myths and fear. Even the council didn't know what had really happened. They assumed humanity had fractured, maybe gone extinct after their exile. But the truth was hidden on a scorched little planet at the edge of an unmarked system Earth. Beneath layers of dust and silence, Earth had evolved in secret. After being exiled by the Council, human leaders made a brutal decision. They cut all communication, burned the satellites, and shut down deep space relays. They didn't want to be found, not until they were ready, and ready they had become. The surface of Earth was a wasteland on purpose, a decoy, a message to any curious observer that humanity had collapsed. But buried deep beneath old continents in caverns reinforced with neutronium steel was the Cradle, a subterranean complex that spanned half a hemisphere. Here humanity thrived. They trained, researched, and built weapons that not even the Council could imagine. They engineered warships like the Vengeance, few, yes, but lethal. And most importantly, they remembered every Drexar attack across the galaxy has been monitored, catalogued, and analyzed. Humanity had never truly disappeared. They'd watched from the shadows building weapons while the rest of the galaxy disarmed itself in the name of peace. They knew this day would come, the day when someone like the Drexar would see weakness and come for everything. And now that day was here. Inside the Cradle, the highest-ranking officials of Earth's hidden military stood around a glowing table, staring at a simulation of the galaxy. Red zones, Drexar-occupied territories, were spreading like a virus. But now, blinking in the middle of the black, was a small blue dot. The Vengeance commander, Commander Arlen, made contact. General Thorne said. He was an old warhawk with cybernetic lungs and half a face made of war-grade chrome. Successful engagement. She sent the message, and the Council asked. Minister Kiril, head of strategic diplomacy, though diplomacy hadn't been useful for a long time. Still silent, General Thorne said, or too scared to admit they need us. A pause. Then Minister Kiril leaned forward, voice low. It's time, isn't it? General Thorne nodded. Yes, no more shadows, no more hiding. The Drexar picked a fight with the wrong species, activate the fleet. At once alarms rang softly throughout the Cradle. Hangars the size of cities roared to life. Massive warships, long thought scrapped or destroyed, powered up their cores, thrumming like sleeping gods awakening. One by one, names lit up on a massive screen above the operations deck. HSS Retribution, HSS Warlord, HSS Ghost Hammer, HSS Final Dawn, and dozens more. Each vessel was piloted by Earth's finest soldiers, trained not for defense but for extinction-level war. These weren't peacekeepers, they were Avengers. Meanwhile, Commander Arlen aboard the Vengeance received a priority encrypted signal. She read the blinking words and felt her stomach twist. Not in fear, but anticipation. You're not alone anymore. Fleet en route. She leaned back in her chair, a ghost of a smile playing on her lips. Let's see how the Drexar handles round 2. But out in the stars, the Drexar weren't idle. The Overmind had already shifted its strategies. No more scouts, no more probing. It would bring its full strength, all hives, all ships. It would swarm Earth before the humans could gather, because deep inside the Drexar collective, a fear they'd never known had taken root, the kind of fear that only humans could inspire. Space had never been quiet, but now it screamed. Sensors across the galaxy lit up as the Drexar made their move. Thousands of warships emerged from void rifts. Wormhole-like tears in space they carved open, using stolen energy from dying stars. These weren't scout fleets anymore. These were extermination hives. Their target wasn't a council world. It wasn't a trade hub. It was Earth. The Overmind had learned that humanity wasn't some forgotten species clinging to ancient tech. They had planned, evolved and trained in isolation, and now that the HSS Vengeance had exposed them again, the hive mind had come to one conclusion: eliminate the source before it spreads. The Drexar swarm approached like a tidal wave of living steel, unfeeling, unrelenting and impossibly vast. But they were already too late. Earth's moon shifted. It wasn't a moon, not anymore. It hadn't been since the humans turned it into Lunarbase 1, a disguised orbital defense fortress. Its surface split open, revealing colossal weapon batteries. Entire continents of automated missile silos rotated into position. From deep beneath the Earth's surface, dozens of warships launched hidden for decades, cloaked, waiting for this moment. They weren't as big as the Drexar hive ships. They didn't have to match in size. They were human ships. Each one is designed to punch holes in celestial bodies. Each one was piloted by people who grew up training for this. Commander Arlen, now flanked by 2 more human cruisers, received her combat orders: delay the swarm until Earth's main fleet arrives. Great, she muttered, tapping the cracked console. 3 ships against a space plague. Better odds than usual. Jin grinned. The Vengeance turned toward the incoming Drexar. Advance, with its railcars now reloaded and weapon capacitors at full charge. It dove straight into the black. The first Drexar ship to engage them, a razor-winged harvester class, never even fired. The Vengeance's railcar burned a molten hole straight through its thorax. 2 more coming up from starboard, Jin shouted. Let them, Commander Arlen replied. The 2 human support ships, the HSS Emberclaw and HSS Warden, peeled off and cut clean through the enemy's flank. Human ship design prioritized forward-facing brute force and brutal maneuverability. They didn't dance in space like Council vessels. They brawled, they bullied. The Drexar weren't used to being hit this hard. One of their hive ships, bristling with cannonist turrets and acidic breaches, launched a full assault on Earth's atmosphere. But it never made it. From Lunarbase 1, Heaven's Spear activated a prototype orbital rail weapon. It was capable of firing a solid tungsten rod at half the speed of light. It only needed 1 shot. The spear tore through space, struck the hive ship dead center and didn't stop. It kept going, ripping through 2 more Drexar vessels before vanishing into deep space. The result: 3 destroyed ships and silence across the swarm's neural network. A sudden pause, a gap, an emotion, confusion, fear. Down below on Earth's command deck, General Thorne watched the battle unfold. Every instinct in his war-wired brain screamed to press the advantage. Launch full fleet, he ordered. All units. No more secrets. We go loud. Across Earth and its orbit, 100 warships jumped into battle. No cloaks, no stealth. Their arrival was thunder in space. Fire rained from the stars. Human ships didn't glide. They charged inside the swarm. Something faltered. The Drexar Overmind recalculated. Humanity wasn't isolated anymore. They weren't fractured. They were unified and disciplined. And worst of all, they knew how to win. It sent out a distress ping across its network, a signal meant only for the ancient Drexar warcast. Being so violent, they'd been locked away even from their own hive for fear they'd devour the swarm itself. The Overmind didn't care anymore. It would rather risk its own collapse than lose to the humans. But humans weren't finished either. The HSS Retribution, Earth's largest warship, jumped into orbit. It was the size of a small city and dark as a funeral ship, with 1 word glowing across its armored side. Never again, Commander Arlen watched it appear on her scopes and whispered, Well, looks like the old bastards brought the big guns. The Drexar had come to destroy Earth. But Earth wasn't a planet anymore. It was a weapon. They came from the void between stars, the ancient ones, the Drexar's last gamble, the warcast. Even the Overmind trembled when it awakened them. Not out of fear. Fear was a luxury it didn't possess, but out of cold, hive-level logic. These were not ships. These were living weapons bred during the Drexar's earliest conquests, back when the galaxy still burned fresh with the ashes of their first victims. They had no names, no language, just a command: destroy. While most Drexar vessels resembled jagged metal fused with biotech, the warcast ships were something else entirely alive in every sense. Each one was a colossal biomechanical beast the size of a moon's wrapped in muscle-bone armor and void ink skin that shimmered with unnatural color. Eyes pulsed along their hulls, limbs clawed at space itself. As they moved, inside them lived the oldest, most violent instincts of the swarm. And now they were coming for Earth. On the command deck of the HSS Retribution, General Thorne watched the long-range scans and didn't speak for a long time. Around him, officers shifted nervously. Even hardened veterans stared at the readings with pale faces. "Are we looking at a planet?" one finally asked. "No," General Thorne said flatly. "That's not a planet, that's a monster." Across the fleet, battle readiness went to max. Shield matrices, charged cannon arrays, locked into target mode, and all human ships repositioned in a massive arc around Earth's orbit. The plan was simple: hold the line, but no one underestimated what was coming. Commander Arlen, now docked temporarily on the Retribution, stood shoulder to shoulder with General Thorne, watching the visual feed as one of the warcast broke through a starfield. Like a serpent from hell, it didn't warp. It ripped through space. Jaws first shrieking across frequencies, not meant for any mind to hear. Sir Jin called through comms from the Vengeance still in orbit. The Drexar just dropped one of their own ships. The warcast devoured it. Commander Arlen hissed through her teeth. "Even the swarm can't control them." "They don't want to," General Thorne muttered. "They just want Earth broken before the humans unite the galaxy," and that's exactly what had started happening. Across Council space, alien species that once turned their backs on humanity were watching Earth's defense in disbelief. Some sent messages, others sent ships. Nothing coordinated yet, but something was shifting. The galaxy was starting to rally. But Earth couldn't wait, not with those things inbound. As the first warcast entity neared orbit, Earth's planetary defense grid fired everything: railguns, plasma barrages, EMP lances, but nothing slowed it. The creature twisted mid-space, absorbing energy through layered void flesh and firing back. Not missiles, not lasers, it roared. A deep subspace growl ruptured 2 human ships from the inside. The Vengeance, still holding in lower orbit, took a near hit. Hull integrity dropped to 41%. Inside, sparks flew as consoles overloaded. Jin was thrown against the wall, blood streaking his cheek. Commander Arlen gritted her teeth and slammed her fist on the panel. "Get us back in the air." Another shriek from the warcast, and one of Earth's orbital towers split in half, metal and fire raining down towards the Pacific. Then came the Retribution's moment. Target locked, the gunnery officer called out. General Thorne gave the word. The Retribution's main cannon fired its judgment core, a super-dense fusion shell encased in quantum foam. The recoil alone cracked part of its aft spine. But the result? Impact. The warcast shrieked again, but this time in pain, real pain. The shell tore through 3 of its limbs and embedded itself deep into its torso, where it began to detonate internally. The creature thrashed, pulling debris and even smaller Drexar ships into its gravity, but it didn't die, it just turned. Right toward Earth. Right toward the Retribution. It was coming. And this time it wasn't roaring, it was charging. Commander Arlen stepped forward. "Get me back on the Vengeance. We've still got the last rail cores around." General Thorne looked at her. "That thing's a nightmare." "You won't survive that run?" She smirked. "Wasn't planning to." He paused, then gave a stiff nod. Make it count. The Vengeance limped through low orbit, its hull scorched, one engine flickering like a dying star. Every system groaned as Commander Arlen climbed back onto the bridge, blood trailing down her forearm. Eyes locked on the growing shadow ahead. The warcast entity was so massive now it blocked the sun. Every sensor screamed warnings. It wasn't just alive, it was angry. Chunks of torn Drexer ship still floated around its limbs like trophies from the swarm. It devoured Earth's fleet, kept firing, hammering it with every weapon in range, but it kept coming. Flesh regenerating bones shifting mid-flight, eyes along its body blinking in patterns no one could decipher. It was headed straight for the retribution. Where are we on Rail Corp? Power, Commander Arlen asked. Dropping into her command chair, Jin wiped the blood off his forehead, voice shaking. We've got just enough charge for one shot, that's it, she nodded. Then we don't miss it. Commander hesitated. If we fire, this close recoil could rip us in half. Commander Arlen didn't blink. If we don't fire that thing, tears Earth in half. The Vengeance powered forward, pushing every last drop of energy into acceleration. They needed line of sight for the shot, and that meant getting dangerously close. Too close, inside the warcast ancient biological systems reacted. Spines emerged from its flanks, Chiton cannons lit up preparing to fire. Weapons incoming. Jin yelled, "Commander!" Arlen didn't flinch. Full shields. Forward. Divert all non-essential systems. Do you mean life support? Yep, the Vengeance surged through the debris field. One Drexar pod clipped their wing, another burst against their shield. The fire raged through the lower deck, but no one stopped. Every crew member knew what this was. It wasn't a mission, it was a suicide charge. Locked on, Jin gasped. We have a shot. Commander Arlen stood up, the creature's central eye opened wide, pupil glowing like a singularity. She could feel it looking at her. Not the ship, her. She leaned over the comms and sent one final message to the Retribution Commander Arlen of the HSS Vengeance. Engages the final shot. If this doesn't work, burn everything. Do not let this thing reach Earth. And then she turned to Jin, fire. The railcar screamed. The weapon drew energy from the ship's spine, cracked the deck, bent the Vengeance's structure nearly in half, then fired a solid ferromass slug wrapped in magnetoplasma, a weapon so dense it nearly broke gravity as it passed. The slug struck the warcast, dead in the central eye. A silence followed, not the kind that was peaceful, but the kind that comes just before something explodes. Then it hit. The eye shattered like brittle glass. Inside energy surged out like a supernova caught in a cage. The beast thrashed, shrieking across every known frequency. Lightning arced from its limbs, its body folded inward, the way a dying star collapses into itself. "Get us out of here," Commander Arlen yelled. "Engines are fried." They didn't escape. Not entirely. The shockwave hit them head-on. The Vengeance spun out, spiraling hull tearing open. The last thing Commander Arlen saw was the flames reaching for the bridge. Then darkness, back on Earth. The Retribution tracked the warcast's vitals, what little they could understand of it. And after 30 agonizing seconds, flatline. The warcast entity was dead. Humanity had done what no species in the galaxy had managed to do. They had killed a god. The Retribution's comms flared to life with static. A garbled voice broke through. "Sip is Commander Arlen still alive?" The bridge crew fell silent. General Thorne leaned in, heart hammering. "Repeat that, is she alive?" The signal crackled. Then clear, still breathing. "Ship's gone, but I'm not against all odds." Commander Arlen had survived. A single escape pod floated among the wreckage of the Vengeance, burnt, twisted, but intact. The humans pulled her in. She awoke hours later in a medical bay, tubes in her arms, pain in every cell of her body. General Thorne sat nearby, expression unreadable. "You did it," he said quietly. Commander Arlen winced. "Told you I wouldn't miss it, yes." Then she passed out again. And outside above Earth the stars were quiet. For now the warcast was dead. The stars had gone quiet. But silence never meant peace. It just meant everyone was listening now. Within hours of the Vengeance's final strike, the once silent Galactic Council came scrambling back to the table like panicked diplomats after a bar fight. They pretended, never started. Hollow signals poured into Earth's outer systems, pleas for negotiation, offers of support, and carefully worded apologies that danced around their decades of abandonment. Earth answered, none of them, they didn't have to. Because the galaxy had just witnessed something no treaty alliance or diplomatic resolution had ever achieved. A Drexa warcast had fallen, not by council forces, not by some miracle, but by a single, forgotten species they had labeled too aggressive to integrate. Now those same aggressors were the only reason half the galaxy still existed. Commander Arlen, still recovering in the med bay aboard the Retribution, woke to find her room filled with officers. General Thorne stood near the door, arms folded, jaw clenched. She blinked through the haze of painkillers. "What?" "No flowers," she rasped. "You've got 37 species requesting interviews," General Thorne said dryly, "and the Council wants to offer you their highest honor." Commander Arlen tried to sit up but winced. "They can shove it. I didn't save the galaxy for a pen and a speech." "We figured you'd say that." "What about the Drexor?" General Thorne's face darkened. "The rest of the swarm is pulling back. That rail core shot, it did more than kill a warcast, it scared them. For the first time in their history, they're retreating, reorganizing." Commander Arlen narrowed her eyes. "Which means they'll be back." General Thorne nodded. "With more worse," she exhaled slowly. "Then we need to be ready." That was the new conversation now. Not only can humanity defend itself, but who will lead the galaxy into war? Across Council space, unrest was boiling. Species once loyal to the Council had begun sending envoys to Earth instead. Trade offers, military alliances. The Brakai warriors even proposed joint combat training, admitting publicly that humans had outmatched them. One by one, the Council's credibility was crumbling, and in its place, humanity was rising. Not as conquerors, but as the last reliable wall between survival and extinction at Earth. Command, the debates began. Some leaders wanted to seize the moment, break the Council completely, and form a human-led galactic coalition. Others warned of repeating the mistakes of the old empires. Commander Arlen was summoned to the War Council 3 days after she woke. Her body still ached, her left arm was wrapped in a neuro bandage, and every step made her ribs scream. But when she entered the chamber, everyone stood, even General Thorne. She didn't waste time. "We're not politicians," she said. "We don't need medals, and we're not here to wave flags. We're still at war." A screen lit up behind her, showing the latest scans from deep space. 3 more warcast readings, all moving, all hungry. The Drexa isn't finished. They're learning and evolving. The Overmind won't make the same mistake twice. The room went quiet. She stepped forward, voice harder now. "If the galaxy wants peace, it's going to have to fight for it. Not with treaties, not with silence, but with action." Earth stood alone and won. "Imagine what we could do together." General Thorne stepped in beside her. "The question now isn't who leads, it's who's still willing to fight." Messages from alien factions flooded the comms that day. Not just messages of support, but enlistment requests. Pilots from Tau Ceti, strategists from the O'Round, even council defectors were offering intelligence. For the first time, humanity wasn't the outsider, they were the center. But somewhere far beyond charted space in the Drexa's hidden hive worlds, the Overmind had begun creating something worse than the warcast. Something bigger. Something meant to erase not just Earth, but memory of it. And it was already moving. The Overmind had one final card to play. In the cold, ancient void beyond mapped space where suns died without ever having been named, it stirred awake its deepest nightmare, the only weapon it had sealed away even from itself. It was called the Hollow Star. Not a ship. Not a beast, not even a warcast. It was a planet-sized hive built in secret across millennia, wrapped in living Drexer flesh and armor, fused with the remains of consumed civilizations. Inside it, billions of dormant soldiers pulsed beneath the blackened crust, while its core burned with the neural network of 100 Overmind fragments stitched together into a singular, thinking god. The Hollow Star didn't move like a fleet. It devoured systems, and it was heading straight for Earth. Back on Earth, the war alarms echoed across every continent for the first time since the first Exodus. The Retribution and what remained of the fleet were already at half strength from the Warcast battle, and yet the new threat was orders of magnitude greater. But this time, humanity wasn't alone. In Earth orbit, a new kind of fleet had assembled. The banner didn't bear Earth's flag. It didn't carry the Council's either. It bore a symbol, newly minted, a white star split with a red line. The sign of the unified resistance humans Bruco Raun, and a dozen other species once fractured, now stood as one. No more hiding, no more waiting. At the center of the formation, Commander Arlen stood once again on a rebuilt bridge of the Vengeance 2, her old crew at her side. The original ship had burned. She hadn't, and now she was leading the entire damn galaxy. She opened comms to the Allied fleet. "This is Commander Arlen. You've all seen what they did. Planets burned and people erased. This is our last stand. But it's not about Earth. It's about the idea that no species gets to be erased without a fight. We draw the line here. We hold the line now. Make them regret thinking we'd stay silent." The Hollow Star emerged from dark space on the edge of Sol's system, eclipsing the distant light of Neptune. Even from millions of kilometers away, its presence was overwhelming. Planet-sized tendrils reached outward. Lightning crawled along its crust-like veins. It spoke into every mind it touched, alien, human, synthetic, with a single, echoing command: submit. But no one did. The resistance hit it with everything, wave after wave of coordinated fire, from the Retribution's Judgment Core to Breck plasma spears, to alien EMP webs that crackled across its shield. Skin. The Hollow Star responded by opening its maw. Ships vanished. Dozens in a blink. Entire squadrons were swallowed whole, but they kept fighting. Commander Arlen led a break formation directly toward the core. "This thing isn't alive," she told her crew. "It's not even a planet. It's a tomb. Let's bury it inside the Hollow Star." The Overmind's collective thoughts began to fracture. It hadn't expected resistance on this scale. Not from them, the humans, the irrational ones, the stubborn ones, the ones who, when told to die, stood up and said no. And then, like a pulse through space itself, came Earth's final move, a prototype weapon long held in reserve, a failsafe, a gift from a dying scientist who once warned the Council they'd regret ignoring the primitive species, the Sol Lance, a beam weapon powered by the sun's own corona. It fired straight through the Vengeance 2's opening created by Commander Arlen's attack squad. The beam tore into the Hollow Star's neural core. The feedback screamed through space as Overmind fragments began collapsing in on themselves. The beast wailed, not in audio, not in sound, but in gravitational distortions that bent light and space around it. And then it imploded. The Hollow Star caved in, crumpling like a dying sun, vanishing into a black maw of its own making. Silence followed. True silence. No warcast, No swarm, no voice in their minds demanded surrender, just a galaxy looking at Earth. Now the last wall between them and oblivion and realizing what had just happened. Commander Arlen, bloodied, exhausted, barely holding herself upright, stared out the viewport of the Vengeance 2. "It's over," Jin whispered. She didn't respond right away, just stared into the dark. "No," she finally said. "It's just beginning." Because peace wasn't the absence of war, it was the promise that if war ever came again, humanity would be waiting,